Morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alex Paul from InvestorStream and I'll be your host this morning. Today we'll be hearing from the CEO of Houston We Have Limited, Elizabeth Whitelock, who will be talking us through the company's operational progress over the last few months. Please feel free to send in your questions via the chat platform in the question pane in the GoToWebinar control panel. You can also email them to me at alex@investorstream.com.au. We'll address the questions at the end of the presentation and we'll also attempt to get through as many questions as time permits. You can also download a copy of the presentation by navigating to the handouts pane in the control panel. A copy of the webinar will be available on Houston We Have's website later today, but for now, I'd just like to throw it over to Izzy to commence proceedings. Izzy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you everyone for attending this first webinar. And I hope that as we come out of lockdown and travel restrictions are lifted, that I'll get an opportunity to visit you on the ground in whichever state you're calling in from. Houston, we have human-centered AI. The focus for today is to take you through, first to give you some context for who we are, because not necessarily everybody understands what we do, and to explain that by talking about a couple of case studies. And as we walk through this, hopefully not only will you understand where we are with the software and what we're doing with it, but we can also touch on some of the good news that we've already started to share through our ASX announcements. So let's just flick through. The first slide is just a disclosure statement, and then we have our numbers. Now, my intention here is not to go through these numbers. They're there for you to digest. Overnight, there has been some additional buying, and our market cap has probably gone up overnight, which is obviously very encouraging. So let's take a look at who Houston We Have are. We are an Australian software company. The technology that we have sits in a very encouraging space in the AI, artificial intelligence. I will talk about some of our differentiators very shortly, but what we have is it's quite different from all the other AI players in the market today, and what we have has a patent to support it. As you may be aware, we were originally designed for a problem that the Defence Intelligence Organization had, and that was to deal with actually situations that lack information. Now, we're all used to being in positions where we are drowning in data, but that world, they don't have necessarily everything that they need. And so it was taking that lack of information and bringing into the mix the human interpretation of a situation, our opinions and observations. It was those two things that brought together the patent that we now have. So our software allows us to blend what we know with what we can see or hear or feel or interpret, and to do that in a highly rigorous way, and to do it in a repeatable way, and to create very, very accurate assessments of that situation, whether that's a future situation or current. And we do that by producing an assessment that says, how likely is this thing to happen? And how confident are we in that? And as a consequence, what you get is a picture that is accurate and without any ambiguity. Now, you would all be familiar, I would imagine, from our announcements that the Defence Department is our major client here in Australia. However, with the acquisition of Prometheus last November, we have branched out into the world of insurance, particularly health-related, obviously. And with that, we now have a wonderful vertical where we are able to take what those clients are using with the Prometheus capability and add in the Houston We Have patented technology. So we're going from being a bespoke software company where we solve problems of various kinds to now we can actually start to solve problems within a particular sector. And so we are expanding that capability that Prometheus brings and adding extra stickiness to that client base. With the Prometheus acquisition, of course, that's allowed us to have this go-to-market set of solutions that organizations can say, I'd like some fraud capability. That also is part of our plan to take the Houston We Have element and create the same capabilities with off-the-shelf solutions for specific problems that we have started to identify. We do work in other areas. You can see that in our channels there on the right-hand side. We're still engaged around investment and finance and law as an example. And some of those will come to light as we talk more about some of the case studies, but also as we move through and build out our pipeline and start delivering other deals. Let me move to the next slide. I just want to expand upon some of the differentiators that we have. Part of the why our AI is actually the word why. Our software, unlike many other pieces of AI software, doesn't just give us a number or an answer. It explains exactly why the answer is as it is. And other AI players who have looked at our software have said, so you can explain our black box algorithm. And that's the reality. So with our capability, we tell you what the answer is or what the likelihood is. And then we explain exactly what is pushing it up in a positive way, what's potentially pulling it down, where are the risks associated with it, and also what might be missing in terms of the information that you're contemplating. So it gives this great clarity to any situation. And in this world where we have lots of oversight and monitoring and regulatory forces coming into being, that transparency means it's going to always be there. You will end up with an audit trail that allows you to go back and say, on this date, at this time, the reason we made that decision is because this was our position. These were the risks. Our software is incredible at predicting. I've been around this software for 10 years and it still blows me away how insightful and the accuracy that comes with it. But one of the key elements and one of the key differentiators is that this product in and of itself can do it at speed. The world of other artificial intelligence platforms need a ton of data and months of analyzing to get it to a place where you get some insight. Sometimes we don't have that luxury. We don't have time on our side. And so being able to assess a situation very quickly and have some degree of confidence about that prediction, that's where we sit really well. I've mentioned the word certainty. In our output, we are unusual in that we don't just say what's likely to happen, we tell you how confident that answer is. And it's because of this patented capability through the algorithms that we use that give us that dimension to the answer. It's simple to deploy. If I can deploy it on my laptop, I'm sure anybody can do the same. But we have lots of different capabilities in terms of how we might deploy it. So for defense, clearly it sits inside a highly secure environment. We have it hosted on Amazon Web Services, for example. So where you need to deploy it, we have a way to do that, and we can do it very simply and very quickly. But I think it's also important to recognize that where our software really fits in is it can become a part and sit behind a number of other systems and data sources. And our industry standard capability allows us to connect into anything that's out there. So regardless of what data you've got or information, our systems can get access to it and use it to do the assessments that we're looking for. Now, I mentioned that this is an exciting space. There's lots of capability here. It's a space that's growing. And you can see the prediction here in terms of where the Statista graph is showing us in 5 years' time a world of $58.75 billion in terms of capability from a revenue perspective. That's phenomenal. And it's a wonderful space to be in, even though there may be many different ways that AI can help and solve. It's also interesting in this new world order that we're in today that the opportunity is there to do things differently, because as we can see, we have to do things differently. And technology and innovation is a way for governments and organizations to reinvent themselves in this nearly post-COVID world. So I wonder what might happen to the AI marketplace given this need to shift and pivot how we do business and how we make our businesses more effective given the restrictions that are likely to be in place. So let's talk about some of the things that we do, and let's talk about some case studies so that perhaps we give you some more context to what the software is capable of. We've probably all applied for loans, mortgages, buying a new car, and we all go through that long-winded manual process that is the credit risk assessment. The process that sits behind any lending platform, it would appear as there's a whole pile of manual intervention that goes on, and there's a whole pile of documents that have to be lodged. In this example, and this is in place today, a lending platform with a very specific focus on small and medium businesses has credit managers who deal with the lending applications. But how do we take the credit manager and then almost replicate their capability and make sure that every single loan is assessed in exactly the same way, without bias, without getting blindsided by anything that's coming in? How do we treat every loan the same? And so in this example, the company has used our software to perform the credit risk assessment for every application that comes in. Now, in the background of their application, the information comes in, they call out to various places to do some assessment checks on whether that company exists on the ASX register, for example, and that information is then passed to our software to run the assessment. And it passes back a couple of numbers, and those numbers make a determination as to whether or not someone gets a loan and they go out to the marketplace for lending and funding, or whether or not that borrower doesn't actually satisfy the criteria and therefore is rejected. Every single application that comes in will know exactly why they were approved or they were rejected. That complete transparency comes through. And this lending platform to date has had zero net losses. As another example from an investment perspective, and the people behind this have a venture arm in their business, and they had a very manual process. They had a number of people who would be involved in the discussion around whether or not to invest in a particular early stage company. And they asked us to take what they do and put it into a repeatable model. Now, what happened through that process was we built the model, we took past data from them, we ran it through, and we said, this venture will be successful, this one won't. And the model was actually more accurate in its predictions than the people who were making the decisions. So that process gave them rigor. It gave them an opportunity to actually look through the lens of multiple people around that table who were investing in it. But collectively, using the model, they have had a greater hit rate in terms of making the right decisions about which ventures to invest in. So the manual efforts disappeared, the bias that might sit behind it has disappeared, and every investment process goes through exactly the same rigorous routine, and an assessment produces whether to invest or not. The last example, and something that's terribly topical, is one around a virus. And this particular case study was conducted by one of the government agencies, the Office of National Assessment, and the focus was the H1N1 virus. And the question was, would it become a pandemic? And then how would Australia manage that, and what factors could mitigate the situation? In that scenario, like we faced with COVID, there were lots of missing pieces of information. And so our approach was to bring together people who had various views of the problem: immunologists, virologists, people from the human side, people from the veterinary side, and people who understand the transmission through the transport and logistics scenario. In 2 days, each of those experts had an opportunity to talk about what they thought was likely to happen, what they could assume based on other pandemics or other viruses. Everyone got a chance to have their opinion held and recorded. They then took the data that was available, which wasn't very much. They used the opinion of the various experts in the room. And that, at the end of the day 2, created an assessment of the situation. Was it likely to become a pandemic? Now, the prediction was such that it was going to be a 3-fold increase on past pandemic situations. The information went up to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister then had a conversation, or one of his people would have had a conversation with the US government around that result. The US government deployed mathematicians and scientists at their Los Alamos base, and it took them 6 months to produce a similar result. Now, that was done in April 2009. In June 2009, the World Health Organization declared the virus a pandemic. It's important to recognize that in that situation, we had very little information to work with, and we had a time factor, obviously a whole pile of consequences potentially coming down the path. And Australia's response to that, and the implementation of various factors, including, if you remember, hand sanitizers outside buildings, and they pumped up the vaccine program. There was a whole pile of things that we did to keep ourselves protected. So an ability to predict at speed with very little information, understanding the risks that were associated with that. So those are a few case studies. We are involved in a number of different scenarios that are similar to these case studies today, with a goal of creating not just bespoke solutions for government agencies or corporations, but also to take those learnings and bundle them into what will become, for Houston We Have, a set of applications that we can sell to address a very specific problem. And we're seeing a trend across a number of our conversations within corporates particularly, that we believe is going to drive us towards having an application that we can sell off the shelf, so to speak, into those organizations that solve basically the same problem for each of them. So we'll still have our bespoke capability, particularly for the defense and national security space, but what we will also have is this ability to have applications as well that people can take and use with some minor tweaking to get it installed within their world. So we are seeing strong growth this year, and we don't believe that that's going to change anytime soon. With Prometheus, we are creating this integrated offering where Houston We Have today is now engaged with a health fund to solve a particular set of problems for them. And so that integration between the two platforms is not just happening at a technical level, where the two systems are going to be together and capable of communicating between each other, but it's also happening with the clients in the Prometheus space. And that's going to continue. As we build one, we can see that there's an opportunity to deploy that into other clients within the health fund sector. You would have seen from our recent announcement that we have been successful in locking in the recurring revenue that comes out of the Prometheus space. So the funds that we have had, I think 17 in total, 17 funds in total have renewed for next year. We've also acquired a couple of other clients in this calendar year as well to boost the fund position, but we've also taken a step just outside that health insurance space into another space in the healthcare sector with nursing services. So we're providing those solutions that Prometheus already has to different clients. I'm delighted with the UK pipeline. We have some incredible opportunities there. In finance, we are talking to brand names that you will recognize, and hopefully we will talk about in announcements soon. We're talking to healthcare as well as the national security space. The UK, as you're probably aware, has been really hit badly by COVID, and they have been in strong lockdown across the country. However, they are now coming back into the office this week, and so we're already, while we've been engaged with these people during this time, now we're starting to see things actually really move as people have all the right people around them to start to make decisions and start progressing towards doing some deals. I'm also delighted to say that we have partnerships that are while embryonic, but we have some very solid partnerships with some, again, decent systems integration capability. Some of the big names in that consulting space now engaged with us, which will help us to expand our client base, because we will have additional bandwidth that will help us to execute not only at a sales level, but also in a delivery capacity. I mentioned the healthy pipeline that the UK has. What we're also seeing there and here is a call for innovation. So there are governments who are looking for innovation to help them deal with this post-COVID world. So we've been invited by a number of agencies to participate and submit applications with our ideas about how we can help them support this new world order. So pipeline from organic and pipeline from these sort of calls for innovation. We'll start to see pipeline coming through in our partnerships, I believe. Overall, the business is in a really, really strong place. We have a strong cash balance, and we are managing our cost base really, really tightly. And I believe that with our clients we have today, as we increase our stickiness with those clients, as we show evidence to them that we can do more with Houston we have into their base, so we continue to expand our revenue capability, but we also continue to shore up the client base that we have. So I'm very excited and delighted to be where we are today. We have never been in such a good position. Ultimately, everything that we do is in order to make sure that we do something that is good for our clients, that we make a difference to them. And in making a difference to them, we make a difference to you, our investors, because that share price should hopefully be reflected in going up, because we start to make those differences and we generate more revenue for you. So definitely our focus is in implementations that help people get to where they need to go in what is quite a unique way with our software. Ultimately, we're looking for the problems because we have solutions, and with Prometheus, we now have greater capacity with other elements to that solution base that allows us to, in effect, take more off the table when we walk into prospects and look at the problems that they have and be able to actually deliver more. Houston, we have a solution, and at this point, we could hand over to questions.
Thanks, Izzy. So we've had a few questions that have come through. I'll just ask you the first one. Who are the peers to Houston we have and your technology, and what do you offer over and above those competitors?
So if we're talking about at a broad sense in the artificial intelligence space, the thing with artificial intelligence is it comes in many different flavors. And so it depends on which flavor you need to solve the problem. The space has many different players, and frankly, I would say that part of our solution set now, given that we can now do more, given the capabilities we've acquired through Prometheus and some of our additional technology hires, we can compete at a pure data science level. But with the Houston we have element, excuse me, the Houston we have element is quite unique. And there have been independent analysts who've looked at our software and said, we haven't seen anything like it. So we are different in our approach. However, I would say that, we're probably all competing for the same pieces of business. It's just that how we tackle it will be different. Some of the names that we might compare ourselves to, or we would be complementary to, most people probably have heard of Palantir, for example. Palantir tackle problems in a different way, but we could extend what they do. There's others out there. There's a great company in the US called Hypergiant who do incredible things in the AI space. Again, we could do some of the elements that they do, but certainly we could do a lot more because we can extend what they do. So it's not an apples for apples comparison, unfortunately.
Thanks, Izzy. Another one that's come through, it's about the size of Houston we have. Is the current size an impediment to you landing a very large client deployment? And if so, how do you get around that?
Good question and insightful. If anybody's dealt with government departments like Defence, they will mitigate their risk on the basis of the size of the organization. So it would be fair to say that a very large deal, define what that is, may be outside of our reach because of the size of our business. However, in saying that, I have already alluded to some key partnerships with some of the big end of town consulting practices. So the reality is we are aiming to bring into the fold a capability that mitigates that risk for anyone who believes we need to have a big brother, so to speak, to make sure that those perceived risks are mitigated. So it would be through that partnership arrangement.
So, Izzy, in what sector are you seeing the most opportunity when you look at your new business pipeline?
So Defence, and then in the insurance as a broader focus, and then tied to that, there are problem sets that will have industry focus outside of insurance. That may sound all a bit vague, but let me just give you an example. So Defence and national security, we probably understand. Then there's insurance and some of the problem sets that we're seeing inside insurance. So for example, customer retention, as an idea, customer retention isn't just an issue for insurance. We are now seeing that is something that is a requirement for telecommunications, for certain manufacturers. So what we would develop for the insurance sector could be then pivoted to solve a similar problem for other industries. So it's more problem specific, but right now defense, insurance, and then very specific problem sets that could go across industry.
Thanks, Izzy. Another question that's come through with regards to the revenue base. Can you explain the current annual revenue and tell us what is recurring and what is the cash burn?
Okay, sure. So we take, let me look at it through the lens of the two pieces to the business. So Prometheus, let's start there. So the way that the Prometheus business works is that clients will sign up to use a particular module. So let's say they want to use the fraud module. So they pay a license fee, which is a recurring license fee to use that module. So it's a hosted module. It doesn't get deployed into the fund itself. We host the module for them. They get access to the module. And so for a fee, they have access to use that for 12 months. And then it gets renewed from the 1st of July onwards. So you've got that piece of the business. And in the Prometheus business, there's also ongoing consulting and support that happens throughout the year. So while we have a chunk of revenue that comes in, let's say 1st of July for argument's sake. So on the 1st of July, we get a chunk of revenue from our funds to continue to use the software modules. And then throughout the year, they will top that up with consulting days so that they can have additional training or specific, say, extra development in some of the reporting. It could be used for a number of different scenarios. So that's a sort of ongoing revenue stream that gets topped up throughout the year. And then on the Houston We Have side, the revenue has multiple dimensions, but let me start with the defense. Defense bought the software last year. They paid for those licenses up front. And then the contract that we have with Defence for the 3+2 years is to supply them services which are training, consulting, support, mentoring, and our team basically, we bill for every time our team gets used to deliver support or run a training course, for example. But Defence also have annual pieces to their contract. So they pay for software support and then ongoing use of the software over the next 3 years. So similar pieces to the Prometheus business with some renewals going through for the next 3+2 years. And then they have basically ongoing consulting, if you like, that we deliver against. So similar but different. There are scenarios where we host for organizations, where we might host a model for an organization, and then they will pay an annual recurring license fee to use that, again, like the Prometheus business. So we are not restricted in how we do our business, but what we are now finding, other than the federal kind of government and defense space, what we're finding is that organizations don't want to take responsibility for installing software. They would rather connect to it in a hosted way. So I think we're going to see a greater push by corporates for us to host things for them and allow them to just use the functionality of that without having to worry about the deployment. And on the last question was burn rate. Our burn rate is currently around $70,000 a month.
Thanks, Izzy. We've had a hypothetical question come through, and I understand you can't talk about specifics about clients, but does the fact that you're engaged with the Australian Defence Department restrict you from engaging with other defence departments in other markets?
Nope. Absolutely not, and we're engaged. We're engaged currently with the UK. So, no. There will be markets that we will not go into. So be very clear, there are countries that we will never go into because of various conflicts and whatever else. But Australia is part of the Five Eyes, which is the US, UK, Canada, and New Zealand. And immediately we are able to access those without any concern whatsoever.
So is there any development being done offshore, and are there any risks in the development of software during the current climate? And further to that, have travel restrictions been causing you any problems?
No, we don't currently do any offshore development. Everything is done here in Australia. The COVID scenario it hasn't affected our ability to do our job. Our guys are deployed, even though it's virtually, to deliver services to defence and services and projects to existing and some new projects. So we're all very busy in that regard. Our ability to run our business in this state is actually quite simple because of the way that our business is structured. So how we host things, where our software and etc. is all stored. So easy for us to do that. Sorry, your other question was around travel restrictions and
yeah, are they causing you any problems?
No, not at all. I think the reality is it would certainly be easier if we could eyeball some of our clients at various points in time, particularly with some of the projects that we're rolling out. It would be obviously easier to sit across a table and work out various things or run a workshop. But we're using technology to help us do those things that we had been doing in person. With the UK, I hope that we're in a position to have borders open soon enough to allow us to support the UK guys on the ground if that becomes a requirement and we get some opportunities and projects there. It'd be good to have people on the ground rather than working through the night to support, but we will do what we need to do.
We've probably got time for two more questions. Are there any enhancements being made to the software, any new modules or new features or anything like that?
Oh, goodness. Software development is never stops. It's one has to remain relevant to your clients. So we are constantly we take feedback. It goes through a due process internally as to what features get up and what doesn't. What are, for example, what do we fix if there's something we might say not work quite as we had anticipated versus what is a new feature. So Houston we have, and that piece of the software is currently undergoing some new features specifically for the defense side of things. We are building out new connections and capabilities so that we have access to various different information sources. And then on the Prometheus side, we're bringing the Prometheus side across, as I mentioned earlier, and we're integrating these two worlds and bringing all of them into a place where we have this cohesive, complete, I like to use the word stack of capability. That means if we need a little bit of analysis and we need a bit of AI over here, then we can take that from the stack that we have, rather than say going out and outsourcing that capability to someone externally. So always developing, and right now our goal is to have this seamless capability between the two business units, and then new features are going on top. And we're currently working on, as I said earlier, we are currently scoping some application specific. What I mean is, addressing a very particular set of problems so that we have an off-the-shelf solution for very specific problems that we're seeing crop up again and again.
Thanks, Izzy. Can you just give some more details on the recent contract win that you announced with Salvio Healthcare? What specifically does a nursing home services provider need with AI software?
Actually, it's not specifically AI, it's from the Prometheus side of the world. And what Salvio needs is actually more insight to their current business. So it's very data centric. And what we're really doing there is helping them make sense of the data that they have. And so the Prometheus team are helping them, if you like, structure that information in a way that they can start to deliver reporting to various aspects of their business so that they actually understand what their business is doing, where their clients are at, where their claims might be sitting around, where, for example, there might be some holes. So ultimately, it's very data driven. Now, when we've got them on board within Prometheus, who knows what kind of other insights we might apply with our AI capability. But right now, it's just really helping them sort through that abundance of information and structure it in such a way that it helps them to make better business decisions.
Fantastic, Izzy. Now, look, I did say we'd have two questions to go. We have two more, so we'll try and keep it as brief as possible.
Okay. All right.
So just adding on to the cash burn question, do you see an increase in headcount, especially in terms of data or AI experts?
So in terms of ultimately, as the business grows, as we get more projects, the reality is we are going to need additional staff to be able to deliver against them. I think that that's just a natural process. So for us at this point in time, it's recognizing when deals are going to land and then making sure that we have the right people in place to help us deliver them. Will we see an increase in data science? I believe we will. And I think the reality is that we are gathering more and more data, and the need to understand that is really, really important. But at the same time, we've got our product. Now, that's not necessarily a data scientist that we need. We need someone who can pick up the tool and actually use it in a way to think through problems. So we will need, given the current workload, at some point in the near future, some additional capability. But it will definitely be based off of our hit rate with our deals before we make any decisions about hiring.
Thanks, Izzy. And just the final question. So I just wanted to take this time to thank you for jumping on and for everyone for submitting their questions. Can the software be easily integrated into CRM systems, Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics and that sort of thing?
It's a really good question. Yes. Something that we have sort of investigated around that space. The reality is we are agnostic to the data. And so if there's a problem that we could solve within the Salesforce world, there's absolutely no reason that we couldn't build a model, and Salesforce actually has open connectivity, so we could actually connect into that and generate additional insight. So if anyone's got any ideas around the types of problems that would that could be used by Houston We Have, happy to hear them. So we're agnostic. We do have some CRM kind of examples. The one that we announced last year around predictions around which car were people going to buy, for example, that all came out of CRM systems, and we were able to identify what car someone was going to buy and when, and we did that with an 83% accuracy because the data wasn't that crash hot. So as an example, if we can help people in that way, happy to take some suggestions and introductions, of course.
Fantastic, Izzy. Look, I just wanted to say on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for joining us, taking the time to do the presentation and taking the time to address some questions as well. I'd also like to thank everyone who attended today. It's been a really insightful look into your business. So I'm sure everyone's taken a fair bit out of it. Izzy, thank you very much for your presentation. Now, as I mentioned before, the recording of the webinar will be on the Houston We Have website later today. As I mentioned, the presentation is on the ASX. It's also in the handouts panel. If there are any questions, any follow-ups that we didn't quite address, please email them to me at alex@investorstream.com.au. But Izzy, thanks very much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for participating. I appreciated your questions, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon, hopefully.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Have a good morning.